AI infrastructure expansion hits a physical limit at the power grid's edge. The growth of these systems relies on industrial-scale electrical generation. Global demand for computing power is outpacing the capacity of traditional sequential infrastructure planning. You cannot plug hyperscale server farms into legacy power grids and expect them to hold. On the left, global AI energy demand climbs exponentially. On the right, India's response, synchronizing renewable energy directly with hyperscale data centers. This energy compute nexus builds the power source and the power consumer at the exact same time. Executing this requires a supply chain shift toward the domestic manufacturing of heavy electrical components. A nation cannot import the infrastructure required for this nexus. To handle this industrial pivot, the strategic focus is moving toward eastern Indian states, specifically Odisha, to serve as the primary manufacturing hubs. This strategy faces a documented execution risk at the state-level capital deployment layer. Building a competitive AI stack requires solving for heavy industry and capital allocation before writing a single line of code. The corporate catalyst driving this physical demand is the Adani Group, which has committed $100 billion in direct investment to build hyperscale AI data centers by 2035. The target output of this capital is the establishment of a 5-gigawatt national data center platform. Standard data center construction relies on extracting power from existing grids. Adani's unified energy and compute ecosystem model builds 3 parallel streams simultaneously: renewable generation, transmission infrastructure, and high-density compute clusters. The baseload generation anchoring this ecosystem is the Kavda Renewable Project, providing 30 gigawatts of capacity. This dedicated compute capacity forms a sovereign AI infrastructure. It is designed specifically to support domestic large language models, AI systems trained on vast amounts of text to understand and generate human language, ensuring national data remains onshore without reliance on foreign hardware. The scale of this domestic infrastructure is validated by corporate partnerships, specifically a recent agreement with Google to establish a gigawatt-scale campus in Visakhapatnam. This initiative creates a macroeconomic multiplier effect across the country's heavy industries. That initial $100 billion direct investment is modeled to catalyze an additional $150 billion across advanced electrical infrastructure and server manufacturing. This creates a $250 billion domestic AI supply chain ecosystem. This corporate strategy relies on bypassing global supply chain shocks by domesticating the absolute bottom layers of the AI stack: power generation and physical servers. To enable 5 gigawatts of high-density compute, the federal government must provide a grid capable of absorbing the load. The blueprint for this is the Ministry of Power's transmission plan for the integration of over 900 gigawatts of non-fossil fuel capacity by 2036. This map shows the sheer physical volume of the required infrastructure build-out: 137,500 circuit kilometers of new transmission lines. To manage this load, substation capacity must expand by 827,600 MVA. MVA stands for megavolt amperes, which is the standard measure of apparent power capacity in electrical grids. The federal capital requirement for this grid blueprint is 7.93 lakh crore rupees. This ambition is backed by recent historical performance. India achieved its nationally determined contribution target of 50% non-fossil electric capacity nearly 5 years ahead of schedule. Over the last decade, solar baseline capacity grew exponentially, jumping from 2.8 gigawatts to over 143 gigawatts today. This drove a macroeconomic transition, moving India from a power deficit nation to a power surplus grid capable of handling a 270 gigawatt peak demand. The grid is also future-proofed through cross-border energy connectivity and undersea transmission networks. The federal government has mapped and costed the macrogrid. The blueprint exists, but its execution relies on physical manufacturing capacity to materialize. Building high-capacity transformers and grid systems requires establishing manufacturing hubs in proximity to resource clusters. The national directive designates eastern India, specifically Odisha, as the strategic anchor for this pivot, moving from raw mineral extraction to value-added production. This document is the Odisha Budget Analysis for 2026-2027. It highlights a projected gross state domestic product of 11.07 lakh crore rupees, representing a 12% growth over revised estimates. To absorb the heavy manufacturing demand for the energy compute nexus, the state's capital outlay, the direct spending on physical assets, must be efficient. However, there is a primary execution risk, a pattern of historical underspending on infrastructure budgets. Between 2021 and 2025, Odisha averaged a 17% underspend on its capital outlay budget. In 2024-25, that gap widened to 22%. The structural reason for this capital friction is the burden of committed expenditures. The specific fiscal trap is that 31.3% of the state's estimated revenue receipts are consumed entirely by salaries, pensions, and interest payments. This creates a rigid state-level fiscal structure that clashes with the capital deployment required by the National AI Infrastructure Plan. The grand national vision for sovereign AI is physically bottlenecked by the administrative efficiency. State-level capital execution sits at the base, feeding physical components into the national transmission grid in the middle, which ultimately powers the sovereign data centers at the top. The $100 billion corporate compute pledges map symmetrically onto the 7.93 lakh crore federal transmission blueprints. But the base layer, state-level capital execution and supply chain manufacturing, acts as the critical friction point, constricting the upward flow of the entire system. Resolving this state-level fiscal drag is the only way to successfully insulate the domestic AI supply chain from global volatility. The competition for AI development is transitioning into a heavy industry race. India's recognition of this physical requirement provides a structural advantage over nations treating AI purely as a digital asset. The efficiency of Eastern industrial corridors and the mastery of the energy compute matrix, rather than silicon engineering, will dictate the ultimate pace of India's technological transition.